Okay, the age-old question, how much should I charge for the work that I do? Oh, people are so opinionated on this one, so let's make a bunch of people mad. And I'll kind of share my framework for how I think through the different stages of firm running and what pricing makes the most sense at each of those stages. It's kind of a combination of several different frameworks, but ultimately the goal is more, right? Bigger numbers. How do I get people to pay more for the output of my firm? Not just because I'm tricking them into something, pulling the wool over their eyes, but because what my firm's outputting is actually more valuable than it was before. Specifically, more value to that very specific type of person, and that'll be a theme through this video. There's 100 different ways to approach this, but super simple framework. We're gonna look at 3 different types of firms, what makes sense in each of those stages. So first up, the day zero firm. Literally picking up your first client. This is usually a side hustle for most people. You can take your maxims of, here's the ultimate way to squeeze every dollar possible out of a client, and all these levels of higher thinking when it comes to pricing. When you're at day zero, you will literally do almost anything for anybody because you're figuring out how to pay the bills, figuring out how to make this a full-time thing, because that job you got, just about any client's better than that job that you got right now. And when your firm is in this stage, you are a price taker. Your price is gonna be dictated by the substitutes, the other options that client has. Now, maybe you're coming into this with some sort of expertise from a past job. Maybe that gives you a leg up so that you aren't quite the same as everybody else in town. But most people aren't starting there. You're taking anything that you can get. So when that client comes in the door, they're probably benchmarking, okay, what's this person gonna charge me against the guy across the street? On the first day, that's probably what your competition looks like. And so the goal across these stages is to get away from that, is to get away from the substitutes, be one of one, so that you have control over your pricing. But you're not that snowflake yet. You probably suck at what you do, you're wildly inefficient, and this is why it's gonna make a bunch of people mad. You can win clients on hourly pricing. If the guy across the street's charging 150 bucks an hour for something you charge 120 bucks an hour for, there's clients that will make the decision based on that. Are you ultimately gonna cost less than that other firm? Probably not, because you're still learning and are probably wildly inefficient. But getting somebody to pay you to do that learning, not the worst gig. Doesn't mean you exclusively have to do hourly and that you shouldn't do some value billing, some fixed fee, like just start wading into that a bit. But here is permission to bill hourly when you are first getting started. There you go. Now I'm framing this as day zero firms. 80% of firms are still in this bucket. What you do is the exact same as what everybody else does. So people are gonna buy based on price. And at the end of the day, long term, that's not the client that you want. You don't want the client that's shopping for the lowest hourly rate, but again, you gotta start somewhere. And in these early days, remember that the clients you have today are never gonna be your forever clients. 24 months from now, what you can increase your prices to will be shocking to you. So the sooner you can kind of condition yourself to get ready for that, the better. The clients you're picking up today, they're not gonna be your forever clients. Now, common traps in this stage where people get stuck here and they're not able to progress to the next stage. Big one is not finding a niche. It takes time for most people. Some people can cruise right into it. But honestly, finding a niche or a few different niches, it can kind of feel like a stop-start affair. Sometimes you'll start down a path and you won't get it right. And you know what? That's totally normal. You're not gonna get it right on your first try. The other thing I think people do is they think of niching down and specialization as just an industry thing, where there's actually a whole bunch of dimensions on which you can specialize. Maybe it's industry and something else. Maybe industry doesn't matter. Maybe it's geography. Maybe it's the type of person that you work with. Maybe it's the way that you deliver those services. Find some combination of people that has a very specific problem that you can be the solution for. The guy across the street is not the solution for. The other big struggle here is charging what you're worth. Nobody gets out of bed when they start their own business and they are just like good at this. You learn this through taking your lumps. Is that ultimately people will complain about pricing, but people generally won't complain about your prices not being high enough. And we have this evolutionary trait that's really hard to not blow those complaints out of proportion. Those people take up a bunch of headspace. And so when you think about how you price everything that you do, you usually skew too low because of those couple people that complain when you're not taking into account all of the people at the other end of your client list who will happily pay more. You gotta optimize for everyone. And what we end up doing is we chronically underprice what we do for too long because of this. Again, nobody figures this out before they just do it totally wrong. Like, that's normal, but a lot of people get stuck in this stage because of that. A couple other traps. You don't get selective enough about the clients you bring in. If you're starting to see this path, ooh, taxidermist, that seems like my thing. But you're taking in phlebotomists. Those two groups don't have the same problems, but if you keep letting them in the door, it's keeping you from going down the path that you ultimately want to go down. And then the flip side of that, being unwilling to cut the people that also don't take you down that path, the people that are already on the client list. Specializing is going to entail hard decisions. And on the day you start, you don't know what that specialization is gonna look like. So the clients you brought in on the first day, you're probably gonna have to cut them loose eventually. But if you never do, you can never evolve to that next stage. Again, 80% of firms still living that life, not specialized or anything. But you're better than that. So let's talk about stage 2, a specialized firm. This is a firm that by finding a niche or 3, it doesn't just have to be 1 in my book, you've eliminated 99% of the substitutes. There will still be substitutes. There will be other people who specialize in serving that type of client, and that's fine. The big deal is you threw out the vast majority of other firms. They're no longer competitors of yours, which means you can go from being a price taker that's heavily influenced by substitute services to setting your own price, to value pricing for the first time. You're making up the rules because as far as your client's concerned, you're probably one of one. That's not entirely true, but you got way more pricing control than you did before. Now, the first time you build this, that client base usually comes from a referral network. You get a couple clients that love what you do, they send their friends, you go out to your favorite clients that you love working with, you say, hey, you got anybody else that you're networked with that has the same problems that you do? Ask, don't be afraid to. And that client list usually starts from a referral network. But at this stage, this is when you start dabbling in content creation and putting yourself out there in a higher leverage way. And this is, it's so uncomfortable for accountants. I get it, it's not accounting, it's not tax. I didn't sign up to be an influencer, for goodness sake, I'm an accountant. But here's the thing, I've said it before, the moment Al Gore flipped the switch on the old internet, your problem became distribution. That is your bottleneck. As you grow beyond this stage of firm running, your job has changed from doing the work, managing the work, to now finding the people who are out there for whom the problem you solve is 10 times as painful as the clients you have on your list today. We cannot comprehend the reach that you have sending a tweet, making a LinkedIn post. The internet is bigger than our minds can get around. There are so many people out there with so many different types of problems. And every time you create a bit of content, every time you put yourself out there, you're enabling serendipity because you don't know who's gonna be on the other side of that. That relationship that could kick something off for you, that could be your next great client. This is where we struggle, is that building a referral network, what we've already done is so much more familiar to us. It's really hard for us to just put that stuff out in the ether and just trust it. And the fact that 99% of accountants are gonna get hung up on that, that's a great reason for you to do it. So I'm gonna say it again. Your job is to find the people for whom the problem you solve is 10x more painful than the people who are on your client list now. Those people will pay so much for what you do and be so appreciative of what you do. And admittedly, it gets hard to know how much time do I invest in that, which can sometimes feel like a slow burn, versus just doing the work. But what is the likelihood that within your little network, within your neighborhood, if you think of all the people out there that could be your clients, that you are just going to stumble into the top 100 clients you could possibly have, the 100 people for whom that thing hurts the most? It's not gonna happen. And the more you invest in putting yourself out there, the more you're going to enrich that client list, load it up with people for whom that problem you solve is really, really painful. Do it. It's the reason I'm here. It's the reason you're watching me. You gotta do it. Firm running is largely unchanged from the time the internet came around. And going from this second to this third stage, this is where we are driving firm growth in a way that the internet will enable. Now, common traps at this stage, the clients who are great for you aren't necessarily clients who are great for your team. Oof. So, you got a specialization, maybe it's something from your background that you know a bunch about. It's one thing to build a practice around yourself, it's another thing to build a practice around a team of people who have that expertise. You'll find as you get into this, the people that you can serve are very different than the people that your team will serve. And this is kind of an inflection point where you gotta decide, is my job gonna be to do the work or is my job gonna be to run the business? And there isn't a right answer there. Like, there's no shame in being the one to do the work. Where it breaks down is when you want the results of one thing without acknowledging the decision that you've made. Can't take the best of both. I really enjoy running firms. I got out of doing the work. Wasn't that fun? Honestly, I wasn't that great at it. But I've got a weird combination of expertise, from software to production, all these different things. My staff doesn't have that expertise. So I had to stop bringing work in that was great for me, and instead bring in work that was great for my staff and upskill my staff in new ways to ensure they had a depth of expertise in the specialization that we wanted to go further into. So that was sending them to industry conferences, investing more and pouring into them the expertise that my clients need. So another big bottleneck here is an unwillingness to upskill your team members in that domain expertise. If you don't have the people that can do it right now, you either gotta go out and find the people who can, or you gotta upskill the people you got into that stuff. And a lot of people do this from a standpoint of, what if they leave? What if you don't invest in them and they don't leave? In my mind, there isn't really an alternative. And the last big stumbling block at this stage is you don't have the staffing model figured out yet. You don't have a compelling reason for people to come to work for you. In the same way that you gotta be the best firm for a certain type of client, you gotta be the best employer for a certain type of person also. And until you figure that out, you fundamentally can't grow a firm. Now there's ways to balance that with diversification in your hiring. We've talked about that before. Leaning into contract, leaning into offshore. Channels where there's a much more abundant supply of people rather than these super hard to find onshore people. There's a whole bunch of different ways to crack that nut, but you can't really move past this until you got a sustainable hiring model. Now on the subject of pricing, this video sponsored Financial Sense. They actually just recently put out a whole nice pricing guide. What's it called? How to price accounting and bookkeeping services for ultimate profitability. Sounds nice, huh? They worked with Lauren Fogelman on this. Covers some great stuff like, is your crappy pricing attracting the wrong type of client? I quote, like a magnet, your pricing either pulls dream clients to you or clients from hell. Oof. It unpacks the relationship between value and pricing, between fixed pricing and value pricing, how to increase prices on existing clients, how to communicate those pricing changes. It's good stuff. I will link the full guide in the video description. And if you haven't seen it before, Financial Sense is a practice management system used by over 1,000 firms. Keeps you organized, got automated client requests. You know how I feel about those. Oh, and check this out, in reports. This is the kind of thing that I'm gonna use to make kind of client strategic decisions. So the way I think about this is I have a revenue expectation per team member. And this is the kind of reporting I'm going to use to look at cross sections of my client base and decide, is this the type of client I wanna take forward with me, or is this now a legacy type of client that I've outgrown? That is Financial Sense, does a whole bunch of stuff. If you have waded into practice management systems before and got sticker shock, check out Financial Sense. You get an outrageous amount of software for the money. Now, the third type of firm, this is where it gets good. High leverage firms. So this is where your firm is reducing the amount of one-to-one work it does and doing more of the one-to-many work. We've talked a bit about this in the past. This works when you're solving a very specific type of problem for a very specific type of person. If you aren't there yet, you're probably not gonna be able to sell a course that's helpful for people, right? Let's say you try to sell a QuickBooks course to help your client do that, reconcile books, all that. Why aren't they just gonna go watch Hector Garcia, right? Your one-to-many services aren't gonna work until you get really, really specific. So at this stage, you're working with a very specific type of person who has a very specific type of problem that you can solve for. And it's at this stage that digital products, mastermind groups. I talked about that in another video, how you can set up these absurdly profitable, 1-hour calls with 10 people who pay $500 a month to be there. You're starting to invest in more scalable, higher leverage stuff, and your business actually kind of starts to look like more of a creator business, from selling sponsorships in a newsletter to affiliate partnerships, to building adjacent businesses that solve kind of adjacent problems for that same client base. The upside here is you're building into your practice all of these things that require no incremental amount of effort from you, and they drive revenue, both for current clients and for prospective clients. And that is the ultimate form of leverage that the internet will enable for you. You're still doing one-to-one. These people still have tax needs, they still have accounting needs, but you're doing a little less of it to make more space to invest in one-to-many. And of all of the things that we've talked about, this is the only aspect of firm running that's changed in the last 20 years. Surely the way that you run a firm has to be impacted by the internet, right? Sure, software has changed and all that, but how do you go out and find the people for whom what you do is going to be most beneficial and then deliver both one-to-one and one-to-many services to those clients? That is the firm of the future. Now, the fallacy with this framework is that it's binary, is that it's not as if you get up one day and we're like, oh, we're number 2 now. The reality is, you're building several different practices in parallel at any given time. If you're a day 0 firm, someday you're gonna pick up your first client that will take you a step closer to being that specialized firm. And there's gonna be some stops and starts. You're not gonna get it right on the first time. That's completely normal. But alongside that firm that you first built, you're growing a new practice that's aspirational, that's taking you to something better. It means doubling down on that new thing, and it means making some hard decisions on the old thing. But to me, this framework is helpful for where do I go next? Because as much as we talk big picture and value pricing and all these kind of grandiose things, the reality is all this stuff starts with what client are you gonna take next? Who's the next one you're gonna pick up? Who's the next one you're gonna fire? How are you gonna invest in your team? What's the stuff you really need to delegate next? So think of this through the lens of how can I start building my dream practice one client at a time. What do you think? He never even told me how much to charge. You stop that, okay? There is no right answer. Just keep pushing the envelope. The more specific that problem gets, the more you can charge, the more they're gonna love you, the more you're gonna have a rad firm, the more it's gonna be a cool place to work for the the type of people that are into that thing. Just give me a price list. Okay, you're not getting it? It's not like that. You can't just price list it.